Hey Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick. Good to be back.
And welcome back to a warm studio. You've been to Orange today.
I have. I drove up to Orange this morning, a long drive, to do work with Rotary Youth Leadership.
Very good.
And at Charles Sturt University, 1 hour chat and a race back. So I hope they got some benefit from it, given the long drive there and back.
Well, of course they did. You've got
6.5 degrees.
6.5 degrees.
6.5 degrees.
A cold snap at about 1,350 metres above sea level or something like that.
I couldn't believe it. Got out of the car and I nearly got blown over. I'm only a small man, but it's a very strong breeze.
Okay. Small man, big heart, though.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Yeah.
You steadied yourself. Now, coming up today, some great stuff in Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey. We are going around the grounds, and tonight we'll head to a Sydney suburb in Castle Hill. Then we'll go to Melbourne, to Pakenham.
Yeah, really totally different locations, different medium prices. It would be really interesting to get a comparison. And they're both incredibly strong areas for different reasons. And
we'll also talk about renovating for profit. You know, what's in, what's out. You know, I'm just blown away by the fact, Charles, the Mission Brown paint is still so very popular.
Well, it's all. I think Lino's coming back as well.
Lino's coming back.
Made a big comeback. We might get slate floors again. That could be another big thing. And also we might get those lovely laminated kitchen colours that we used to get. The stone. We should get rid of all the stone and go back to laminate. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I drive past places and they may have begun life as a red brick house in the 1970s, and then someone's done a number on it after watching The Block or something and bagged it, right? Bagged the outside so it's a smooth surface and painted it. And then I think, you know what? I'll come back here in 10 years' time and there'll be someone chipping the bag off.
That's right. Yeah.
Taking it back to the brick. That's what happens. It
is crazy. And it is. It's a sign of changing times. You look at something and it becomes old very quickly and off we go again. I mean, bagging a house used to do that because there might have been problems with the brickwork. Then it became very fashionable. So I have a blonde brick house that I live in now that I bought way back. And I actually had that bagged. It looks all right. I don't think I'll be taking it back to brick anytime soon, though.
Blonde brick, as beautiful as she is. And I thought bagging houses was something that real estate agents did when, have a look at that thing. That's terrible.
Here we go. I remember one headline at an auction. I think I might have said this to you once before. The agent got it terribly wrong. Instead of saying deceased estate, it said diseased estate. And then there was another one where the agent got a little bit over anxious and it said deceased estate, owner said sell. So I don't know what that one was about either.
Diseased estate. That wasn't a brick funereal house, was it? Maybe. 13 12 83 is our number, and Charles Tarbey taking your calls. 13 12 83 if you've got any property questions. Now let's have a look at what's come out of Canberra today. Federal Treasurer Scott Morrison has thrown a cat among the pigeons, reaffirming government's position that changes to negative gearing will not feature in the May budget.
Well, I had a chance to meet with the Prime Minister and the Treasurer prior to the election. And they called a group of 5 of us in to talk about the impact of negative gearing, what we thought about it as a real estate industry. And I think we bandied together to try and stop the process from happening at the time, because we were concerned about what happened way back, I think it was in the 80s, when negative gearing was removed and then it was brought back within about 3 months. And I think at that time they said, look, as far as they were concerned, it was off the table. And so to date, it's not often a politician will tell you something and it stays that way, because policies will change based on what happens in their own rooms and discussion and what's necessary. But they said no, they felt it was not going to even be on the table for discussion. But I think there are issues relating to it, and we've talked about this so many times in the short space that we've been chatting to each other, Nick.
Yeah.
And it still really comes back to supply issue, and if they do change negative gearing or attempt to change negative gearing, which is fine. I mean, in Canada they have a hybrid of negative gearing. In New Zealand they don't have negative gearing, but they've got other things that replace them. And I think that the issue that we have, because Australia is such a large country geographically, and because it has 1,000 different real estate markets, and because Sydney and Melbourne are the talk all of the time, we could end up making a major change based on what's happening in a place like Sydney that could decimate other real estate economies. And I really think they've got to think this through. I think it's a Sydney partly Melbourne problem. I don't think it's a major issue around the rest of the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. I heard a commentator say a similar thing today, that it's important, as you've just highlighted, let's not just look at what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne. So instead, to tackle affordability, Scott Morrison says they will drive for further private investment on the supply side.
Well, that in itself is great to hear, but the issue is not in personal investment or assisting developers in growing their portfolios or developing more property. The problem, as I see it, comes all the way back down to local councils and their ability to work with state governments and the flexibility or lack of flexibility, because that's where it all starts. That's where it can all go wrong. And if you lodge a development application, and again, I know that this has come up a number of times, you lodge a development application in some councils, and even though it meets all criteria as part of the development application, some developers are still going to Land and Environment Court almost at the same time because they know it's going to get knocked back.
For any good reasons? I mean,
generally it's related to the local population. They may not want it. It might be a political issue, but the reality of it is that that's where the problem starts. If you don't have flexibility in the area, and we had Greg Nybo on last week from South Australia, and he was talking about 200 square metre blocks, and that you could build 2 apartments on it. And a lot of people go, well, isn't that really just getting a bit out of control? But as we've talked about before, if you look right across the inner city Melbourne, inner city Sydney, you see terrace houses, you see semi-detached houses, and people have lived comfortably in those for years.
We've seen them for 150 years.
Correct. So
That's right.
I don't understand why we can't get a change there. The urban sprawl started quite some time ago, in particular in the Sydney market. And of course that puts a lot of pressure on infrastructure, which then puts pressure on state governments, puts pressure on the tax, etc., and the land tax rises, all other taxes that are supposed to be used for whether it's land tax or payroll tax go somewhere else, and it gets out of control. And I think that, again, the biggest issue is if you could take a small parcel of land in suburbia and turn it into a duplex very easily without too many problems with council, or if you can turn it into a block of 4 apartments that might house people, or 4 townhouses comfortably. There are some blocks of land that are 750 square metres or 1,000 square metres, and on blocks of land like that in some parts of the country, they're putting like 30-storey buildings on them. So I don't understand what the problem is.
13 12 83, Charles Tarbey's here. Property Fast Track, and taking your calls, Diane. Hello, how are you?
Good, Charles. How are you?
Oh, that was Nick, but I'm Charles. Hello, Dee. How are you going? Is that how you say your name?
Diane.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sorry,
that's right.
Diane. Sorry. Yes, Diane.
I have a question just in relation to investing in property on behalf of my children.
My favourite pastime.
Now, look, unfortunately, my children they did receive an inheritance last year.
Oh, okay.
And we have invested this money, but are really looking to invest in property on their behalf and hopefully buy them a unit. We aren't in any hurry at all. So I just kind of wanted your opinion on the outlook for the unit market and maybe the best area that we should be looking at to buy for them, and what structure we may need to look at for investing on behalf of our kids.
Yeah, look, the structure I'll definitely leave to an accountant to give you advice on that, Diane, because that can take a number of different shapes based on your personal circumstances. But when it comes down to apartments, from my point of view, there are apartments that are coming on the market right across the Australian real estate spectrum. Some I would stay away from, and others I'd look very closely at. The affordability is the issue. So you're not going to go, perhaps, I don't know how much money they've inherited, but you're not going to go and spend $1 million on a 2-bedroom apartment in the lower North Shore of Sydney.
No.
Because a lot of the capital growth has already been taken up, and it's going to be some time before they get capital growth. I would be investing in the regional areas. I'm still very strong on regional areas because the halo effect is still moving out to those areas.
Right.
There's a lot of apartments on the Central Coast. There was a major amount of developments on the Central Coast starting back 30 years ago when people were perceiving that the Central Coast was going to boom, and it didn't. And so there are a significant number of apartments there that you can do exceptionally well on. I was talking to some people on the weekend. They're from Port Macquarie, and Michael and Alison, and they were talking to me about the apartments there, and they said that near the beachfront you could actually buy some penthouses in those areas for $450,000. Now,
Oh, wow,
Port Macquarie had a massive oversupply because a lot of retirees went up there. But again, it's one of those marketplaces where it's got structure, it's got airports, it's got education, it's got hospitals. It's all the right things. And I believe that the Sydney market is creeping more and more out to those areas.
Okay, so another question. People are telling me that the unit market in Sydney, wait 18 months, it's going to crash, there's going to be an oversupply. What do you think about that?
Well, in some areas I completely agree. I think the issue is not going to be so much nowadays an oversupply, more so probably the inability of some of the buyers to complete the transaction, because a lot of people from overseas have bought in Sydney and they can't get their money out of the country that they started in, and the banks over in Australia are making it very difficult for overseas buyers to borrow any money here. I think you're going to find a lot of people won't be able to complete when time comes for the construction to be done, and then the banks will call for valuations, and if the valuations don't stack up and they do want to buy, they're going to have to put more money in, and they may not be in a position to do that. I think that is going to be where I'd be watching. So I'd be listening for the news out of Asia, banks, etc., and watching the movement there, and that'll give you a very strong indication as to what the future is going to look like.
Okay, one more question.
Oh, geez, well, you might start charging for this, Nick.
Just in relation to regional areas, I get that, and I take that advice on board. But just in relation to the Sydney market, is there any pockets of Sydney that you think might stand out compared to others?
Yeah. We talk about these suburbs that sit in between suburbs, and you might hear about Newtown and you might hear about Ashfield, but you never heard about Summer Hill.
Right,
and people sort of have this tendency to think, oh, that's a different postcode, or it's not as good a suburb. And there are some locations in Sydney where you can still buy a brick veneer home for $550,000. I know this sounds crazy, and I know that you could get on the freeway within 5 minutes of these suburbs and be in the city of Sydney in 35 minutes. But you know what? Nobody knows about it because people don't want to talk about it. They want to live in these suburbs, but they are great investments where gentrification is taking place. And in a very short period of time, very short period of years, those areas will become incredibly valuable because surrounding these areas are already multi-million-dollar properties.
Yeah. Great point.
All right, but if you wanted to chat offline sometime, please let us know, and I will certainly tell you exactly where I think you should be buying.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thanks, Dion. And in fact,
thank you, Dion.
Appreciate your help.
Thank you.
There's a new website that maybe Dion wants to go to. It's propertyfasttrack.century21.com.au. So she can contact you there and get some advice.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Easy. Now, I wonder, once we've got over the postcode snobbery, that's what you're talking about, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, it is very much the case, yeah.
I like that analogy, look in between the suburbs that we know about for the ones that are coming up. Let's go back to the negative gearing thing. Do you think government's right or wrong to leave negative gearing as it is?
I think it's a dangerous... A dangerous part of legislation to change because it's massive. It impacts on so many people. And there are people out there that might have... forget about the people that are seasoned investors and they've done very well and they've got quite a few properties and they're coping. What about the ones that are new in that have taken up a higher debt factor before responsible lending really kicked in, and all of a sudden they could be impacted by this process if it's not grandfathered? That could be a very, very dangerous situation. So what will happen there is that they may be forced to sell their properties. If they're forced to sell their properties, you might see some cheaper properties coming on the market, but that's going to impact on everybody that owns real estate. And people that own real estate today would yell at you and say, well, I don't want the price of properties to come down. I'm really excited about the equity that I've gained. So I think you've just got to go back to the major issue in that Sydney market, summer Melbourne market, and look at the supply and focus very heavily on that. That would be the best advice. Landcom, when I was selling real estate going back in the early days, Nick, a builder could go out and get an allocation of land from Landcom. They could say, I'll take those 10 blocks of land. They literally would pay $500 deposit for each block of land. They could go to council, get plans approved, build a home on that block of land, and only you've paid $500. We would sell that home for them, and all it's cost them was a construction cost, and everybody sits there and settles by redirection. The builder, that Landcom, and the buyer all in one room. And that was a great way of getting developers and investors out into the market, building more properties quickly for people.
Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey. Nick Bennett's my name. And the phone number for you tonight, if you want to ask Charles any questions about property, 13 12 83. We'll go under the hammer in a moment with Matt Shalhoub. Steel, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Sydney's auction market. Not sure which is stronger, to be honest, but it's probably the Sydney harbour insatiable desire. You know, our harbour city is beautiful and the folks want to live here, so the desire is intense. A record number of people rush to sell their digs on the weekend, hoping to seal the deal before the school holidays and Easter breaks, and with a clearance rate hovering around 80%, buyers are clearly as keen as mustard. Melbourne had a great one too, despite being in the middle of school holidays. Let's have a chat now with Matt Shalhoub, an auctioneer who runs his own company called Under the Hammer. And he's got his finger on the pulse. He's in the backyards every weekend. G'day, Matt.
How are you?
Going well, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, he certainly has his finger on the pulse, this young man. 10 years as an auctioneer now, Matt, would that be right?
That sounds about right.
And how many auctioneers have you got working under you at the moment?
We've got a team of 16 working in our office at the moment.
Right, that's a massive number. I was looking at the auction results over the weekend, and of course Melbourne beat Sydney. It came in at 1254 auctions with an 81% clearance rate, but Sydney had 1154 auctions with 81.5% clearance rate. How did you find the Sydney market? Because that was where you were focused on this weekend.
Yeah, mainly focused in Sydney market, but we found some strong results. Our personal clearance rate was sitting in probably just under 80, so about 78, 79%. We ran 123 bookings on the weekend. That's spreading across Sydney, so it was still fairly active, I think.
That's great. You would have conducted almost 10% of the auctions that went in the marketplace in Sydney. That's an incredibly big effort. So you're going to get a great concept of what's going on, but anything spectacular happened for you on the weekend?
I think there was probably two standouts. The first of those being a house we had in Mascot, a pretty much original home.
Yeah.
They had about 15 or 17 registered bidders on it.
Down to the airport?
Down near the airport. There was a lot of speculation as to what the property was going to sell for because Mascot seems to be one of those very strong marketplaces at the moment, and I think when there's a strong market, sometimes can cause actually buyer apprehension.
Matt, can I just stop you there for a second? Now, Mascot would be one of those suburbs that we were talking about earlier on, where it's in between other suburbs, and not a lot of people talk about. When you think about Mascot, you think about the airport.
Too noisy.
So
it's like the castle.
So that's why. So that's one of those sleepy places that a lot of people don't even think about buying in. So, please continue.
No, you're right. And then, so what actually happened was we actually kicked off the auction at the reserve, at instructions from the vendor.
At the actual reserve price?
At the actual reserve.
Have you ever done that before?
Only once or twice.
Yeah,
probably 7,000 auctions. I've probably done it twice.
Very odd circumstance. Okay.
It is, and the funny thing was it had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction at first, but then it ended up selling for $540 above the reserve price.
Wow. Yeah. So that's an unusual tactic then, if you've only done it twice in many auctions. Ordinarily, when are we aware as a bidder of the reserve price or of it being, as I say, on the market?
Well, look, over the years, auctions have probably changed, particularly in the Sydney market. I believe they still use the phrase on the market very prominently in Melbourne. But, Sydney auctioneers phased out that phrase quite significantly several years ago. So buyers, when they come into auctions, are pretty well versed and they know what properties really are worth. I think that the best thing there is that buyers will ask you the question occasionally, but it's more so, I think, the intent, the energy levels and the urgency that the auctioneer will show at the very end when buyers know that the property is going to be sold.
But some of you, as auctioneers, are exceptionally good at building the tension when there's actually nowhere near the reserve price. So that's an interesting part. I always talk about when I was auctioneering that you always knew when the auctioneer was going to be a difficult one, Matt, and that's when all of the real estate agents, as soon as you started talking and you were out the front of a property, the agents went and hid behind the bushes. They didn't even want to acknowledge you as an auctioneer. I bet that's never happened to you, right?
No, we're getting the other. We're actually finding the opposite now. We're finding that astute buyers, and whether it be buyers agents, or just buyers who've missed out a lot, are actually coming out normally quite strong on the front foot.
Right.
As a bit more of an intimidation tactic to the competitors.
Yeah.
So what you'll actually find, when you'll hear phrases like "we are selling" and things like that, but more importantly, obviously as auctioneers, we do try to stimulate the bidding as much as possible to give the owners a chance to see what really is the market prepared to pay for the home on that day.
And if you're new to the whole game, it's important to get out and test a few auctions yourself and just be involved in observing, isn't it, to see how you may approach it when it's time for you to buy.
Absolutely. I mean, seeing the number of buyers that we see each and every single auction day, everyone's going to have a different strategy and a different tactic. I think you've got to find what works best for you. And more importantly, just, I think one of the biggest things when it comes to setting your auction strategy is where buyers, I think, forget is to talk to the agent that's selling the home.
Yeah, is there a change in energy that you're noticing across the market? We were talking to Tom Panos last week. Tom said he's noticed a change in the energy, a little bit more apprehension. Are you seeing that too, Matt?
Absolutely. You've definitely noticed it this week, which has gone by more than any. Obviously being one of the bigger auction weekends with Easter this weekend. I think that a large part of that comes from people often having missed out so much over the last month or two, and that fear sort of creeps in a little bit. And then what you'll actually find is still the number of registrations is quite strong. It's just the participation rates might be a little bit lower, especially at the beginning part of an auction.
Mate,
wow, okay.
Just talk about the changes, if we can, to interest-only loans and investor finance. Are we beginning to see them impact upon the market? Are those changes taking some heat out of it, or is it too early to say?
Oh, look, I think it's very early days. I mean, depending on, I suppose, what pocket of Sydney you're talking about as well, we have found some of the unit markets have been probably a little bit more immediately affected. However, saying that, the funny thing is throughout the course of the Saturday, I mean, we start our first auctions, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we run through at about 5:30, and you can see a change almost through the same day.
Yeah.
But I think overall it is probably a little bit too early. But I think that there are signs of a little bit of an early impact.
And that's a broad question which we can consider for Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane.
Yeah, the Brisbane market's still reasonably good. It's been sitting in the 50s for a while, but they only had 140 auctions, but still it's a clearance rate that's been consistent. Canberra is the one that I've been watching very closely, and there's a lot of talk about Canberra and how well that's doing, Matty, and that came in at 69.8% clearance rate, and Sydney came in at 81%, just behind. Melbourne came in at 81%, just behind Sydney. So there's still very strong clearance rates with so many auctions, so many properties going to auction, and you just got to wonder, haven't you? You've got to wonder where it's going to slow down, because in the marketplace that you've been auctioning in, there's a significantly high demand. As you get further and further out west of say Sydney, for example, the auctions they're not quite as successful.
No, they're not as aggressive as, say, the more prominent metro markets. You do see that where you go further west or even further south. And then they do get a little bit more affected by the slightest changes. But I think that's also down to traditional auction markets versus areas that are still going through the growth stages of the percentage of properties actually going to auction as well. So the education levels of the marketplace has an impact on that as well.
I'm wondering, if I want to appoint an auctioneer, Matt, what's a tip you'd give to someone when appointing that person? What skills, what particular connection do you feel like you're going to have with the vendor? What relationship consideration should we give to that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first thing a vendor needs to sort of look at is who they feel comfortable is going to get them the most amount of money for their home. I mean, that's why they're selling the property. I've never met anyone who wants to sell for anything more than top dollar. That's the nature of
that's human nature.
It's human nature. It's like every buyer wants to try and get it for as little as they can. Every vendor wants to get as much as they possibly can. I think the most important thing, though, is when a vendor chooses someone, they're choosing an agent primarily first to sell their home, and they're looking at the auctioneer as well, who's going to conduct the sale for them. I think it's very important to watch how the agent actually works with the auctioneer as well, because the auctioneer will work on instructions from the agent.
Yeah, that's the part, isn't it? That's the teamwork, Matt.
It is.
Well, look, it's been great having you on. I hope you're able to come back and talk to us again.
Anytime, it's been a pleasure.
Good on you, Matt. There goes Matt Shalhoub, auctioneer with Under the Hammer. Great title. Why wouldn't you call it Under the Hammer?
Well, it's very clever. Very
Absolutely.
clever.
13 12 83. Charles Tarbey is here tonight, Property Fast Track, and taking your calls. He has a wealth of experience if you want to get into property or get out of it or reconfigure the way that you're in it. And there's a great new website you've launched, Charles. This is impressive.
I didn't know I had. Gee, I'm a lot busier than I thought.
Well,
I was.
you probably had someone help you out with it, but if you're looking...
There's always a chance of that. There's always a chance.
But if you are looking to sell your home, buy your next one, or find a reliable expert to manage your investment property, you can drop Charles a line and he'll help you achieve your real estate goals. And you can visit that site, which is propertyfasttrack.century21.com.au.
And I'm copied into those messages, so I'll be able to get straight onto it.
Absolutely. You're on the phone tonight, 13 12 83. Nick Bennett and Charles Tarbey with you. with you tonight, taking your calls on all things property on 13 12 83 as we go around the grounds. Nothing to do with sport, Charles.
No, and I like this part because we really do get a chance if you've got a snapshot, you want to get a snapshot of a region anywhere across Australia and New Zealand, we can get that done in real time with some extraordinary real estate agents.
Yeah, well, thanks to the fact that Century 21 has an extensive national network, and that includes Jane Booty, principal at Century 21 Castle Hill in Sydney's northwest. Hi, Jane.
Hello, how are you?
Good, Jane. Good to hear your voice, and congratulations on your success in the region. You and Tony are doing exceptionally well. I love the Hills District because it's going through some major change. It has been for the last few years, but it's become even more highlighted of recent times. And it's for those people that don't know, Castle Hill's around 30 odd kilometres from the CB, northwest of the city of Sydney, and it's now home to a lot of very expensive properties right through the region. So, Jane, what would you like to add to that? As a description.
Expensive, Charles. One sold this weekend for $4.8 million. That blew us all away.
And do you remember the days when you sold land, when Tony sold land in Castle Hill for $50,000?
We certainly do. I bought a few of those blocks. I wish I'd have bought a few more.
Yeah, I wish I'd have kept what I bought.
Yeah.
That was my problem. Tell us a little bit about the changing face of the Hills District.
Yes, well, there's a lot happening in the hills at the moment. It still remains a lovely, family area with a real strong, sort of solid feel, very safe and leafy and green. But we've got the Northwest Rail link with 2 stations coming in Castle Hill itself.
What's the time frame for that at the moment?
It's running well on schedule and expected to be there well and truly on time for 2019.
Now, have you had an incredible rise in the medium density and different housing that you put together, blocks of land that you put together, and you're able to build substantial apartments on there because of these changes?
Look, at the moment, there was a little frenzy initially, or quite a big frenzy initially. There's a bit of a perfect storm brewing for developers. However, most of the planning is still in the gazettal hasn't come through yet, so it's taking a long time and it is still in draft planning stages.
I'm glad you said that because Nick and I were talking earlier about the supply line, and I mentioned that local councils, state governments are the ones that mostly are dragging the chain, and that's an example. Would you say that's an example of that occurring?
Yeah, I think so. Look, they're saying they want to get it right. They want to create good suburbs. They're projecting that Castle Hill will be something like Chatswood, which is a little frightening in some aspects. It will change Castle Hill as we know it. But at this stage, they're concentrating on the areas 400 metres around the 2 stations, so which is Showgrounds and Carrington Road, and that's up at almost near the towers. So that's where they're concentrating, but of course they have those stations going from Epping to Rouse Hill. So there's a lot of areas where they have that planning underway at the moment. So a lot of people sort of got in quickly and were all presuming they were going to get multi-storey buildings and putting together these super sales. Not too many of them have gone through at this stage.
Right.
A lot of them at this stage the developers are holding. They're interested, they want them, but they're waiting for those confirmations.
Jane, just to wrap it, what's your forecast for 2017? How does growth look?
I think nothing's going to stop Castle Hill for 2017. We're expecting that growth will continue. Our average house price is $1.4 million. Our average unit price is $790,000. We still have a high demand, 70 to 80% clearance rates every week. So we really see very strong growth.
Well, that's the sort of area, Jane, that even though the price is up there, that you still want to continue to invest in. So thank you very much, Jane, for giving up part of your evening.
Oh, enjoy this Crisp Autumn evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
It's Around the Grounds on Property Fast Track, and Craig Seymour joins us now. He's from southeastern Pakenham in Melbourne southeast with Century 21. G'day, Craig.
Hi there.
Yeah, now, Craig, here's the difference. Did you just hear Jane talking about the prices of properties in her area?
Yeah, and then we fell off the chair.
Yeah. Get back up again.
Now, your area is not 30 kilometres, but more like 50 kilometres from the CBD and east of the Melbourne CBD. What's the demographic of your area? Why are people migrating to your area? Why would they migrate to your area?
Yeah, correct, Charles. We're about 55k southeast of Melbourne CBD, so an easy commute. I guess we're on the out. For those that don't know where Pakenham is, it's on the outer fringe, the end of the electrification line, railway line. The demographic, we're getting a lot of people moving to Pakenham because, despite all the rhetoric in the news lately about housing affordability, Pakenham is very affordable with a medium house price of $410,000.
Yeah, and that's the incredible part. I mean, Pakenham is a fantastic area. The facilities, I've been through there, down to visit you, the shopping centres, the medical centres, they've got everything. And it's really quite strange. And you're saying just over 400,000.
Yeah, that's right. It's in terms of what Jane was just talking about, it's an absolute bargain, and that buys you 410. You can buy a nice 4-bedroom home, 22 squares, something like that, on a 400 square metre block, and it's a great place to live. That's the thing. It's a beautiful area close to the Dandenongs. We're 40 minutes from Phillip Island. Yet still commutable to the CBD if you have to.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, when you think about those sorts of prices and you think about how strong the Melbourne market is overall, and again, if you think about things moving from the CBD out in terms of people gaining more equity and being able to invest, you've got to think about putting your money in an area like Pakenham.
Absolutely, and that's why we have so many families moving to our shire. I think we've got about 15 families a month moving into our shire, and it's a broad range. You asked earlier about the demographic, and it's everybody from first home buyers to second home buyers to investors, or investors are about probably 15% of our buyers at the moment.
Yeah, I can see a healthy mix of families, as you say, couples, young couples, families. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and the schools are very attractive. We've got about a dozen schools in Pakenham. Good mixture of private and public, and that's one of the draw cards. Apart from the obviously affordability, but lifestyle and the schools as well.
On the electric train line.
Are you finding you're getting enough stock there, Craig, coming through? Is there enough release of land or development going on to meet the demand that you're getting?
No, well, the Pakenham land is just about dried up at the moment. There is more being developed, but right now land is a bit of a premium.
They're far more proactive in Victoria, in particular state government and so on, than other governments, other state governments.
Yeah, and certainly around Pakenham, if you go the next suburb closer to Melbourne, the suburb of Officer, there is about 8,000 homes being developed there in the next 6 to 7 years. So that's a huge growth.
Well, I think your story is strong enough for me to suggest to people that's an area they should be investing in, because at those prices, Craig, that's sensational. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Time to pack up and go to Pakenham.
Yeah, yes, I think so. So, with those prices.
Absolutely. We are with Charles Tarbey tonight, Property Fast Track. Nick Bennett's my name, and there's a new website you can check out if you're looking to sell your home, buy your next one, or find a reliable expert to manage your investment property. You can drop a line and they will help you achieve your real estate goals. You can get Charles at propertyfasttrack.century21.com.au or on the phone tonight answering your calls on 13 12 83. In a moment, what's old is new. How to renovate for profit. Yeah, Charles Tarbey here tonight taking your calls on all things property on 13 12 83. He's here to help you, and Nick Bennett with you too. Retro is a word frequently used in fields like fashion or interior design. We know that what's old is new again. My daughter wants a typewriter. She wants binoculars. The other one wants a turntable. Now, trendy folks might be wearing skinny jeans and denim jackets. Trendy homes are once again adorned in wallpaper and mid-century furniture, all the stuff our folks flicked out, Charles.
Yes, I know. And wallpaper, I'm sure, is probably going to make a comeback as well. Shag pile carpet might even too.
Quite possibly.
You just never know.
Maybe even cork tile. So Cherie Barber, she heads up Renovating For Profit. That's her website, and you can catch her on Channel 10's The Living Room. And most importantly, here's Cherie with Tim Webster on Talking Lifestyle every Monday between 11 and noon. Cherie joins Property Fast Track. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, Cherie.
Hi.
Look, I know that Charles is busting to find out whether wall-to-wall shag pile will make a comeback.
Well.
Oh, 100% not.
Not.
I'm afraid not. The shag pile has gone. However, shag pile rugs never really went out of fashion either, so they're still definitely around.
Wow, okay. Well, my first house that I bought, I I did put shag pile carpet in it, I must admit. It was a very new Australian thing to do. And you like this one as well, Cherie. I painted the wallpaper on because you could buy wallpaper patterns in rollers, and you could just roll it on and it looked like it was wallpaper. Do you remember seeing those at all?
Yeah, I pull a lot of those wallpapers off actually in my renovations these days. So, but look, they loved, back in the 70s, wallpaper was all the rage. Like I remember my mother wallpapered every room in our house, I think. But the wallpaper has definitely made a big comeback. But these days, you're not wallpapering your whole house. It's more just, 1, 2 or 3 sort of key focal walls in your house.
Like a feature.
Yeah, so I call it sort of a strategic focal wall, so a wall that's in the line of sight. So, for example, if you walk in your front door, a wall straight in front of you, or quite often people wallpaper their master bedroom wall. Or they might do, a feature wall in the lounge room where you have your main TV area.
What's a favourite thing for you? When you're looking at decorating a property, is there a certain theme that you really enjoy implementing?
Oh, it's ironic because right now what's really hot is all the sort of retro-inspired sort of Scandi furniture. So it just seems that every single furniture store in Australia at the moment has got that sort of retro sort of style furniture. It was very common in the 60s and 70s. They call it Nordic style.
Nordic style, and Scandi being...
Or Scandi.
Scandinavia.
Yeah, and a lot of it's in, most of it is in oak, and obviously a bit of walnut coming through. So it's definitely a return to the 70s without question, and, tied in with some beautiful wallpaper, and equally with lights as well. We're getting a little bit more adventurous with lights. So we tend to, over the last 5 or 10 years, we've really been playing it safe. We've had a lot of beiges, a lot of, light greys, dark greys, but definitely colour is coming back in, especially the teals and greens this year. So,
Cherie, if Scandi's back in or is in, can't I just go to IKEA?
Yes.
Didn't you go?
You don't need to spend $4,000.
I heard that somebody said they went to IKEA to buy some pillows and walked out with 2 ducks. So,
I was there yesterday, man. That place is overwhelming. Gee, they do it so very well. What about
every time I go to IKEA, I go in there to get a vase. I end up coming out with 10 trolley loads. Yeah. You even plan to buy.
It's a bit like going to Bunnings. Mission brown is a curious colour, isn't it? We see it all over the place. It still seems to make an appearance from time to time. Incredibly cheap. A lot of people use it on exposed timbers, like maybe verandas or wall posts that at the front of the house. Is that ever going to make a comeback, or is it just a no-no?
It's sort of a no-no, but what I would say is, there's lots of renovators, people like myself and my students right across the country, and every day we look at Mission Brown because it was just used so much back in the 60s and 70s and even into the early 80s. So not many people paint stuff Mission Brown these days, but what we're seeing is a return, like a real trend back towards natural timbers. So I think more and more people these days are trying to live more of an organic sort of lifestyle. So less people are renovating their house or installing sort of man-made materials, a lot less acrylics and stuff like that. And people do love that natural timber look. So we definitely get our browns back in through our timbers.
Now, Cherie, I've been in many, many homes, many thousands of homes over the last 45 years of being in real estate, and I have seen some home renovations and designs done by homeowners that would absolutely shock you. And they wonder when they put the home on the market why purple and blue and reds. They don't understand why people don't like them. Now, for you have to stay ahead of the game all the time. How do you do that? How do you do it?
Well, it's actually interesting you say that. I actually don't stay ahead of the interior design trends too much. I mean, I'm a TV renovator, but I'm very much a big advocate and preacher of actually playing it safe, choosing a colour scheme that appeals to the majority, not the minority.
Yeah.
And that's really important when you're renovating for profit. Now, look, if it's your own home and you plan to stay there for the next 10 or 15 years, knock yourself out, do whatever you want, because you got to like getting up and living in your home every single day. But if there's a chance you might sell your property in the next year or 2 or 3, I'd be erring more on not going the crazy colours. Don't paint your house teals and and go crazy. I'd be erring more towards safer colours like the whites, the beiges, the greys, and then maybe just injecting a little bit of personality with a bit of wallpaper here and there or some timbers. So I think the key is less is actually more, not the other way around.
No, well, it is very interesting, and it's always good to get somebody such as you with your expertise in property, because I know how much more or easier it makes the job, how much more a vendor can get for their property if their property is presented in the most substantial way. So great to actually talk to Cherie.
Thank you,
Nick.
Cherie. And you can check
welcome.
out more at Cherie's website, which is a great place to visit if you're thinking about selling your home, renovatingforprofit.com.au. We'll talk soon, Cherie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles Tarbey, well done. And your day is not over. You're off to Sky News now.
Off to Sky, 9 o'clock. Yes, we have a lovely time there for 15 minutes to talk about what's going on around the marketplace.
Quick whip
Nick.
through hair and makeup. It'll take you about 2 minutes.
They do not give you anything.
You're a good-looking bloke.
But thank you. They give you nothing.
Thanks very much, mate. See you next
But joy.
Monday. Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey.